So bent were these people on fulfilling their lusts that the homosexuals were not stopped by the presence of the old man, this venerable, grey-haired, one would imagine, man coming out of his door. The master of the house goes out to them. That isn't going to stop them. He pleads with them. Nay, my brethren, nay, I pray you, do not do so wickedly. This man's come into my house. This is foolishness. Look, here's my daughter. There's his concubine. I'll bring them out. Humble them. Do to them whatever seems good, but don't do this vile thing to him. But the pleas of this man fall on deaf ears. Even the promised substitutes don't work. He says, look, I'll give you 2 women instead of 1 man. Here's my daughter. She's a virgin. Here's his concubine. Wouldn't that do you? No. The 1 man is better to them than 2 women. This old man mixes with his pleas, rebukes. He says, this is wicked. This is folly. This is vile. Verse 24. But the men would not hearken to him. Not one of them. Not one of them flinched. They were all so set upon their sin. And the bit would not means they did not desire to. They did not want to. The men did not want to listen to him. It was a matter of their wills. Their wills were set on their lust. So all the reasoning, all the protests, all the rebukes counts for nothing with people like this. But the most terrible aspect of their sin was that this was in the church. And to try and get this across to you, I ask you to imagine just for a moment if some visitor came to our services and then came to stay with a church member in that church member's house. And then a group of men from the church, knowing where he was staying, came together, surrounded the house, started hammering on the door, and said, bring out that visitor that we may gang rape him as a bunch of homosexuals. That's what you're dealing with here. And that's the point of reading Genesis 19, the start of the chapter, and Judges 19, the end of the chapter. Easy to remember, they're both chapter 19. The point is, and the parallels are striking between the 2 chapters, the church, or at least this part of the church in Gibeah, the church has become like Sodom. Like Sodom. Sodom was some few miles to the south and east of Gibeah. It had been destroyed a few hundred years before, and now Sodom has come into the covenant community. And now we remember the Levite with his concubine and servant. They said, oh, we better not go into Gibeah, it's pagan, better not go in there. You never know what might happen in that ungodly city of the unbelievers. So they go into Gibeah thinking that everybody will be all right there and things will be good. And they find out that they'd have been better off in Gibeah with the world because the church was more rotten even than the ungodly. That chapter, Leviticus 20, which contained the verse against sodomy, later on goes on to say that these sins, sodomy included, were the sins that were committed by the Canaanites. And this was part of the reason why God sent Joshua in with his sword to slaughter them, because they had filled up the cup of their iniquity. The Canaanites engaged in homosexuality, and therefore they were to be destroyed. But now the Israelites have come in, and the men of Gibeah are not only like Sodom, they're like the people who were destroyed in the land for this same sin. But they're the church. A few years ago, Ken Newell, a former moderator of the Presbyterian Church in Ireland, stated repeatedly and emphatically in the newspapers that 3%, he reckoned, of the Presbyterians in Ireland were homosexuals. That's what he said. And he's a former moderator. And you would think that he would have some idea. Or you would think at least that some of the other men in the church would have admonished him for such a wicked statement. But he got away with it. Not a whimper. 3%. And out of 300,000 people, he said that would mean there are 900 homosexual Presbyterians in Ireland. That these people are not only members, but Sunday school teachers, and elders, and ministers, and maybe professors. 3%. His judgment was that the Presbyterian Church's homosexuality rate was the same rate as society as a whole. What a judgment for the preaching and the discipline and the godliness of that denomination, coming from a moderator. If he'd have sat down and thought all day, I doubt if he could have thought of something more damning than that entire denomination. But very little whimper even was heard. He's saying, in effect, I think Sodom's in the Presbyterian Church. I'd say we have our Gibeahs too. Maybe not the gang rape thing, but we have them. That's what he's saying. And he's not saying these people are under discipline, or these people ought to be under discipline. He says they're flourishing in the denomination, in the congregations, in the special offices. That's his judgment. I wouldn't have dared say a thing like that, but that's what he said. And this is what happens when a church apostatizes. It gets so bad that it degenerates to sodomy, because there isn't really anything worse than sodomy, apart from bestiality. That's about as bad as you can get. From all the shenanigans in the Church of Rome, and given their wicked law against the marriage of their priests, I dare say, and you can judge this one for yourself, I dare say that the homosexuality rate of the Roman Catholic Church in its clergy, which I reckon to be the holy parts of the church, is higher than the society around it. And they are amongst the class, probably the highest sector of society, that engage in paedophilia, the abuse of small children. And of course, this is the bit that's swept under the carpet. It's not the priests with the girls by and large, it's the priests with the boys. And that is not just paedophilia, they won't mention the word, it's sodomy. That's what's going on in that church, and that's what the Pope and the cardinals and the bishops, especially in Ireland, have been sweeping under the carpet for decades, and not just decades, centuries. When the visible, so-called church gets so corrupt that sodomy takes a hold. And it is an open question if the clergy in the Church of England are much better than the clergy in the Church of Rome. And Romans 1 makes a very important point about homosexuality. For this cause God gave them up. What cause? Idolatry. Homosexuality arises out of idolatry. The people forsake the true God and worship idols, and therefore God gives some of them up to the vile, unnatural sin of homosexuality, of lesbianism, and of sodomy. The idea is that the people become so twisted and perverted that they deny the one true God who made the world, that's implanted in every human being, that God gives a special judgment upon them and says, you know, you are so twisted and warped. I'm going to give you over to the lust that you can hardly tell the difference between sexual attraction between a man and a man and a man and a woman. You don't know who I am? You warp that, the creator-creature relationship. Well, the next most basic relationship is the difference between a man and a woman. And I will give you lust where you desire your own gender. And that's the thing about these Benjamites. It wasn't the case that these Benjamites in Gibeah were godly church members who were truly worshipping Jehovah. These Benjamites were idolaters before they were sodomites. And their sodomy came out of their idolatry. Their sin against the seventh commandment is rooted in their sin against the first commandment. These men were Baal worshippers before they were homosexual gang rapists.